Hello. This is the short lecture regarding the importance of the single effect in a prose tale by Edgar Allan Poe. This is a fascinating essay by Edgar Allan Poe. It's very influential, within, the writing community. And this one also traces back to 1842. Now, in this essay, what Edgar Allan Poe is doing is, first of all, he's giving some nice compliments to Nathaniel Hawthorne, because obviously these guys were both New Englanders. And as we know, New Englanders like to hang together in the literary world. But more primarily, what he's talking about is this theory that he had as a writer. And Edgar Allan Poe, interestingly enough, we remember him primarily for his short stories. If we were to kind of do a little bit of just surveying on the street, what people most often remember him for is his poem "The Raven," which is an excellent poem. He was a poet. He was also a writer of short stories. He has many that are, certainly The Telltale Heart, Fall of the House of Usher are very well known. He's, interesting side fact, he is, kind of known as the father of modern detective fiction because of his short story, The Murders of Rue Morgue, which is set in Paris, a city he never visited, which is a really good example of how he imagined things. But it's a story of a detective solving murders in Paris, and it turns out that the murderer was an orangutan the whole time. So really, he's also, very influential for the whodunits of those who came after him. His inspiration obviously coming from Memoirs of the Doc, which were nonfiction memoirs that came from a Paris detective and one of the first of his kind. Um, but Bob Poe, actually, very interesting enough, for those who, were his contemporaries, Poe was a very noted essayist, and his essays were almost his predominant output. He wrote essays, he wrote reviews, he was very well regarded in that field. We now remember him primarily as a very heavily spooky fella, which he was that too, but he was also a very interesting thinker and an essayist, which is a long, rambling way of saying that what we pull out of this, very interestingly, is what Poe was really kind of interested in about Hawthorne's work. And also, we see it reflecting on how he viewed his own, which is basically that he views, the short story as the kind of perfect vehicle. And the short story was very much still in its kind of infancy compared to the long form novel at this point. But the short story was really kind of coming alive in American writing at this stage, and when we are looking at Poe. And what he was really interested in is the idea that the short story was capable of being read in a single sitting, and that gave it the unique power to deliver a single effect. A novel obviously is going to be more nuanced, it's over a much larger period of time, whereas for Poe, the short story was really kind of like a small one sitting gem, and it should be used to kind of create one emotional impact and reaction on the reader. As we've seen from a lot of the ones I've mentioned, in terms of, he's the writer of Cask of Amontillado, of The Fall of House of Usher, a lot of Poe's short story, Telltale Heart, Poe tended to go for, he went for a spooky effect in his short stories, but we can also see this single effect in a lot of the short stories that we are also reading ourselves. And one of the sections that I'm going to really kind of point you toward is, if you look on page 1511, because in my photocopy of this, very fortunately, you can actually see that I was able to capture page numbers on this one. Pulling it out, the ordinary novel is objectionable from its length for reasons already stated in substance. As it cannot be read in one sitting, it deprives itself, of course, of the immense force derivable from totality. Worldly interests intervening during the pauses of perusal modify, annul, or counteract in a greater or lesser degree the impressions of the book. But simple cessation in reading would, in itself, be sufficient to destroy the true unity. In the brief tale, however, the author is enabled to carry out the fullness of his intention, be it what it may. During the hour of perusal, the soul of the reader is at the writer's control. There are no external or extrinsic influences resulting from weariness or interruption. A skillful literary artist has constructed a tale. If wise, he has not fashioned his thoughts to accommodate his incidents, but having conceived with deliberate care a certain unique or single effect to be wrought out, he then invents such incidents, he then combines such events as may best aid him in establishing this preconceived effect. If his very initial sentence tend not to the outbringing of this effect, then he has failed in his first step. In the whole composition, there should be no word written of which tendency, direct or indirect, is not the one pre-established design. And by such means, with such care and skill, a picture is at length painted which leaves in the mind of him who contemplates it with kindred art a sense of the fullest satisfaction. The idea of the tale has been presented unblemished because undisturbed, and this is an end unattainable by the novel. Undue brevity is just as exceptional here as is with the poem, but undue length is yet to be more avoided. So what Poe is really interested in is this idea that the the reader of a short story is the author's to command for this entire sitting. These short stories are meant to be read as one long go. And so the writer has the opportunity to create one kind of emotional single effect on it. So as you're looking at these short stories, consider what kind of emotional effect is my author intending to have on the reader? As you look at these short stories, consider what was that intention? Thinking about it, the conclusion of a short story, think about what was this emotional reaction that I had? What perhaps was I intended to feel? That was all intended to be a one sitting incident. And so this is a very interesting thing that we are pulling out of the Poe and useful to consider going forward for this idea of the single effect and its intention and its response and reaction to this reader. So I hope that this was very useful for you. And I am very much looking forward to seeing how you guys kind of interpret and apply the the Poe reading as you kind of tuck it in this idea along with the other ideas that you were pulling out of our short reading assignments. Thank you very much, and I will talk to you again soon.